can the Prime Minister stay in power? A buoyant Boris Johnson, in the face of a flurry of resignations, says he's staying put.
The job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
But even in the Commons, 3 of his own MPs called on him to quit.
The Prime Minister constantly tries to deflect from the issue, always tries to blame other people for mistakes, and that at least nothing left for him to do other than to take responsibility and resign.
We're live in Downing Street on another day of political drama in Westminster and more uncertainty for the country. Sajid Javid tells the Commons enough is enough after his shock departure last night.
And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough.
Resignation, resignation, resignation today from Johnson's government. Who's gone and why since the big hitters quit? And it's all kicking off in football too tonight. The Women's Euros begins.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hussain in Downing Street.
Good afternoon from Downing Street, centre of a dramatic 24 hours in British politics, and it's not over yet. After the shock that saw both the Chancellor and the Health Secretary resign last night, this morning, one by one, a series of ministers and others have quit their government positions. This lunchtime, the Prime Minister told the Commons and the country he is going nowhere. The Labour leader described Boris Johnson's behaviour as awful and unacceptable, but also hit out at cabinet members who hadn't quit, saying those left behind were a Z-list cast of nodding dogs who had no integrity. One who did resign, the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid, said he quit because the problem starts at the top and that is not going to change. Enough is enough, he said. With the very latest on what is still very much a developing story this lunchtime, here's our political reporter, Shihab Khan.
Morning, Mr. Javid. Is it all over for the Prime Minister, Mr. Javid?
Looking very content this morning, the former Health Secretary will be aware that his shock resignation last night may have been the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson. The move was contagious. The Chancellor soon followed, as did 8 others on the government payroll. Today, more, including this minister, are doing the same.
You've handed in your resignation. Why was now the time to do it?
I think it's now time for the party to move forward and look to choose new leadership to take it forward.
And a total of 7 others have today already done the same, and more could quite easily follow. Even those who had previously been loyal on his backbenches are now saying the gig's up.
I found this very, very difficult to do, but I've had enough. The public have had enough. There's a lack of trust.
This is about ethics, this is about morality, this is about honesty, and quite frankly, we deserve better and the country deserves better.
It is pressure like he has never seen before as he made his way to Prime Minister's questions today.
Is it all over, Prime Minister?
He started off in his usual jovial spirit, making light of his predicament.
This morning, Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I expect I shall have further such meetings later today.
But the mood soon changed as the leader of the opposition focused in on the Prime Minister's record.
The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade. Have some self-respect.
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's exactly when When times are tough and when the country faces pressures on the economy, that is exactly the moment that you'd expect a government to continue with its work, not to walk away.
But even some of his backbenchers were far from happy.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
If there were circumstances in which I felt it was impossible for the government to go on and discharge the mandate that we've been given. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going. And that's what I'm going to do.
Isn't it the example, Mr. Speaker, but it's the Prime Minister constantly tries to deflect from the issue, always tries to blame other people for mistakes, and that at least nothing left for him to do other than to take responsibility and resign.
Then the outgoing Health Secretary took centre stage with this damning verdict.
Treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And, Mr. Speaker, I will never risk losing my integrity. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough.
But as ministers resign, others are replacing them. Nadeem Zahawi will be moving into Downing Street as the country's new Chancellor.
There'll be many people at home wondering why you've decided to take this job. It feels like this is a sinking ship.
This is not the time to be a divided team. It's the time to focus on delivery. For the second half of this Parliament, my focus is to rebuild the economy. The Prime Minister's absolute focus is delivery, delivery, delivery. Then people can judge us on our outcomes.
The reality is your predecessor has resigned, the Health Secretary resigned. They are citing the Prime Minister's integrity as the reason why. Why are you still staying?
The Prime Minister yesterday apologised, explained that with the benefit of hindsight, he made a mistake appointing Chris Pincher. He didn't get this decision right. He apologised for it. I think that's the right thing to do. I take a different view to my colleagues.
For now, the question is, can the Prime Minister survive? And that reception as he left the Commons today would suggest there's something he's nearing the end. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
It is no understatement to describe the last 24 hours as a whirlwind for the Prime Minister, the government and the country. But how did we get here? Well, a month ago, Boris Johnson survived a no-confidence vote, but 41% of his own MPs withdrew their support for him. Then the Tories lost their former stronghold of Tiverton and Honiton to the Lib Dems and Wakefield to Labour in 2 by-elections. Last week, the Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, resigned after allegedly assaulting 2 guests at a club. Last Friday, Downing Street said Mr Johnson was not aware of any specific allegations against Chris Pincher. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was forced to apologise after admitting he knew about previous inappropriate behaviour by the MP. Minutes later, the Health Secretary Sajid Javid and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak resigned, and junior resignations have followed, piling on yet more pressure on the Prime Minister. Well, I'm joined, as you can see, by our political editor, Robert Peston, and our deputy political editor, Anushka Asthana, who is at the Houses of Parliament this lunchtime. Robert, if I can start with you, how many times can we say the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, this Prime Minister, is on the brink?
Well, look, let's be clear. If we had a politician in number 10 less determined than he is to stay there, and he is, I'd say by all historical precedents, unbelievably determined, he'd have been gone by now after all the humiliations over recent weeks. And just today, seeing him at Prime Minister's questions, beleaguered, isolated, not a single MP stood up and praised him. And we had 3 of his own side, 3 MPs, Tim Norton, Gary Sambrook, David Davis, calling on him to resign. And then we had his Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, giving what many would say was a powerful, emotional speech about how he wasn't in politics to be someone but to do something, and he felt that the rot that he felt his party and the government was suffering from came from the very top, and therefore he had to resign. And in what felt like a sort of pointed reference to the members of the cabinet who hadn't resigned, he said doing nothing is still an action. So Boris Johnson under tremendous, one would say for a Prime Minister, unprecedented pressure to go.
There is one very powerful group of Tory MPs who could bring a quick end to his leadership. Will they?
So, crucial meeting this afternoon at 4 o'clock, the 1922 Executive Committee. They're the sort of trade union representatives for Tory MPs, and they have a very big decision to make, which is, do they change the rules to allow a new vote of confidence earlier than next June? Because there was a vote of confidence, this June, and that normally under the rules you've got to wait another year for another one. They are under huge pressure from their colleagues to change that rule. I couldn't honestly tell you now whether they are going to do that. They're certainly going to announce a different kind of test of the Prime Minister's popularity. They're going to announce that there will be new elections for their committee, which will take place next week, which will be one way of gauging whether the Prime Minister has support among his MPs, but that would not be enough to get him out before the summer recess. What they need to do, if they want him out before the summer holidays, in just 2 weeks, is to change those rules to allow another vote of no confidence now.
That clock is ticking. Robert, for now, thank you very much. Anushka, to you, please. And why now are we seeing more and more Conservative MPs, ministers quitting or complaining about the Prime Minister?
I think it's important to stress that the Chris Pincher scandal has really tipped a lot of people over the edge for two reasons. The first was what happened on Friday, the Prime Minister claiming again that he had not known about specific allegations and having to change his tune, saying he forgot later in a few days. And what MPs say to me is that is another lie, and they are fed up of it. Also, that position, Deputy Chief Whip, was seen as really important because it's a pastoral role for the party. Now, as Robert was saying, the overwhelming mood among the MPs I speak to is that it is game over for Boris Johnson. They don't know whether it's today or next week or if he might stumble into the summer. But not long ago, they were talking about him going into the next election. It feels to me that even the cabinet ministers who have stayed in place don't think that that is possible now. And of course there is talk about the 1922 changing the rules, but there's also a lot of chatter about the idea that its chair, Sir Graham Brady, could simply decide after tonight's meeting that he walks into Downing Street and he tells the Prime Minister that his time is up. That idea of sending in the men in grey suits. To give you a sense of how febrile the atmosphere is at the moment, I know for a fact that leadership hopefuls are actually holding campaign meetings. I know of at least one that happened this morning, and there is a lot of talk about what it means for those leadership contenders to either have made the decision to stay in cabinet or to have walked away. It feels like this is the beginning of the end for the Prime Minister.
Anushka, thank you very much for that. Well, away from Westminster, what are voters thinking? Amy Lewis is in Tamworth, the seat currently held by Chris Pincher, the MP whose behaviour has triggered this latest crisis. Amy.
Yes, Nina, I may be standing 100 miles away from Westminster in Tamworth in Staffordshire, but nonetheless it is where the latest round of political mess started for Boris Johnson following his support for Chris Pincher. He has now apologised for that, and Pincher has been suspended by his party, but nonetheless he remains the MP for this constituency. He's been the MP for this constituency for the past 12 years. He has a majority of almost 20,000 voters. In other words, this is seen as a safe Conservative seat. So with that in mind, I have been speaking to voters and asking them if there was an election now who they would vote for. Many, but it's important to say not all, have been telling me they believe that it is time that the Prime Minister stands down. How did you vote at the last election?
Conservative.
Are you happy with that choice?
I was, but not so much now.
Why?
Well, he's made a lot of mistakes.
Well, he's got himself into a load of trouble, but I think he'll get out of it.
For all that he's had to do with since he's got into office, I think he's done a good job.
I don't think he should stay as the Prime Minister because for what he's done. But I got to give him that he got us out of COVID.
I think there's nobody else at the moment that can take over, that people can. They know Boris for who he is and what he does.
Well, what many are telling me is that they believe that the conversation should be focused more on things like the cost of living when this is all sorted. In other words, they are fed up of hearing about scandals and want instead things to be sorted like the cost of their weekly shop.
Amy Lewis, thank you. Let's return to Parliament then and to the Conservative MP Andrew Morrison, who quit his job as a trade envoy last night. Thank you very much for joining me this lunchtime. Of all the allegations, the scandals, the fines, why now for you and so many others was this the point to resign?
Well, thank you. The issue for me has been a long burn one. Yesterday, I suppose, the straw that broke the camel's back was the letter by Lord MacDonald to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, which made it very plain that the Prime Minister had an imaginative relationship with the truth. And that, I think that's really what triggered me. Of course, we've then had a string of ministerial resignations, and I think I'm losing count of the number of ministers who are going. They seem to be falling like dominoes today.
But it seems the names, the numbers, even the calls for him to quit 3 of his own MPs at Prime Minister's questions don't seem to matter to this Prime Minister. He is effectively cracking on. Have you quit your job over nothing?
Well, I felt strongly about my job. It was important to me, and I was making some progress with it. I'm deeply committed, was deeply committed to it, and I certainly will retain my strong interest in North Africa and Morocco. But I can't serve under a Prime Minister under these circumstances. Honesty, integrity, decency, they should be the hallmarks of this place. I can't serve a man who has very few of those qualities.
The Labour leader Keir Starmer earlier criticising those members of the cabinet, the front bench, who haven't quit, and also people like yourselves, I guess, who are only quitting right now. Is that a fair cop, that actually in terms of your criticisms of your Prime Minister have been around for some time now, not just this latest incident over the allegations surrounding Chris Pincher and how he was then promoted?
I think that's a fair call, if I may say so, and many of us have struggled with this probably for too long. As I say, yesterday there was a trigger point for me. That's why I resigned when I did. But I do value loyalty, but there is a playoff between loyalty and integrity, a point that others have made. And yesterday, I'm afraid that equilibrium was disrupted finally for me, which is why I resigned yesterday.
Andrew Morrison, what impact will one man's determination to keep his job potentially do to the Conservative Party in both the short and the medium term?
Well, at the moment, what's going on, I think, is Boris Johnson is acting like a sheet anchor, not only on the Conservative Party, but on our politics more generally. And I have to say to the country, Sajid Javid made, I thought, a very, very powerful personal statement just now in the House of Commons, where he referred to duty to country. I just hope Boris reflects upon that and does the right thing later on today. I say that more in hope than expectation, but at some point this has got to end, and I see it ending only one way.
Andrew Morrison, thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. There is, of course, round-the-clock coverage of a PM in crisis. The news as it breaks online at itv.com/news. Let's move on now to the summer of sport, because it is progressing quite nicely so far, with England's cricketers celebrating that big win against India and Cameron Norrie securing his place in the semi-finals at Wimbledon. So can England's footballers get in on the act too? Let's hope so. Today is the start of the Women's Euros, with the opening match at Old Trafford tonight. Our North of England reporter Sangeeta Lal is at a fan zone in Manchester. Sangeeta, what is the atmosphere like at the moment at this crucial build-up?
Well, everyone's really excited. Fans have already started to gather here. There's some table football going on, although I imagine the Lionesses will like to have more control of the ball later. Some face painting in the back there, and the big screen where everyone will be watching tonight. And it will be more watching than ever before. A record-breaking 500,000 tickets have been sold this year. That's twice the number sold the last time the tournament was held in 2017 in the Netherlands. But just to put into context of how far the women's game has come, the last time it was held in 2005, it was only shown in venues across the northwest. This time it's across the country to sold-out crowds. Tonight, more than 70,000 people will be watching at Old Trafford, and the tournament will end at another sold-out stadium at Wembley. And the Former England women's captain Carol Thomas, who led the team in 1984, said it would have been in her wildest dreams to play to a sold-out Wembley. And both England and Austrian fans I've spoken to here today say they're just so happy the game is being recognised the way it is now.
Oh, it's great. I mean, sell-out crowd. I've been sell-out at Old Trafford to watch the men's game, and it should be a great atmosphere tonight.
Greatest Christmas present I ever bought for my daughter.
Yeah, it was. It really was.
Have you been to a football match together before?
One time, but of course the crowd wasn't as big as it is today, and it's the Women's Euro, so it's totally different.
It's Old Trafford, so...
Yeah, of course.
It's going to be a great one.
Yes.
So kick-off is at 8 o'clock tonight for the start of the tournament, one that UEFA has dubbed the biggest women's sporting event in European history. The Duke of Cambridge has wished the Lionesses luck, something no doubt fans here tonight will be wishing too.
Sangeeta Lal, thank you very much. Let's return to the leadership crisis here in Downing Street. Boris Johnson told the Commons he won't be quitting as he faced a bruising Prime Minister's question time. Robert is still with me. Where are we at this lunchtime, Robert?
Well, I was really struck by your interview with the senior Tory Andrew Morrison, who was, until yesterday, trade envoy, resigned, saying to you that it's because he thinks the Prime Minister lacks honesty and integrity. He also said to you that he thinks that Keir Starmer, Labour leader's criticism that they should have done it earlier, he said he thought that was a fair criticism. It's been weighing on his mind for some time, and he called on the Prime Minister to heed what Sajid Javid had said today in his resignation speech, and he called on the Prime Minister to resign today, but he also said he was saying that more out of hope than expectation. The pressure on the Prime Minister is enormous. As I said to you earlier, there is this crucial meeting of essentially the trade union leaders of the backbench Tory MPs, and they will have to make a decision about whether to try and force him out before MPs go on holiday in 2 weeks. But be under no illusion. If Tory MPs want Boris Johnson out, he's not going to do it voluntarily. They are going to have to drag him out.
Robert, thank you. Mary's here at 6:30. From me, from Robert, and the whole of the Lunchtime team. Bye-bye.